In 1973, George Romero decided to take a break from his newly established zombie universe and do something wildly different, i.e. this film about an outbreak which threatens to take over the entire world and turn everybody in it into beings not themselves. Okay, so it's a little bit similar, admittedly. Hi guys, so the first that I'd ever heard of the Crazies was when the 2009 remake came out, and it was through that I found out that there was a version before that done in the 70s. And when I then discovered that Romero had done said version, I was suddenly very interested indeed, because I was already a fan of Romero by the time that the remake came out. This original version of the Crazies, though, is quite different from the 2009 one. I think the more recent one went down the path of being more a zombie type film, you know, a disease in the air, and it makes people go crazy and they start becoming murderous and killing people. You get a zombie type experience to a point. But this first film is not that. This original one is more about the disease. It's so what happens in this? So there's like a government biological weapon that's accidentally released in a small town in Pennsylvania. There's only like 3,000 or 4,000 people in this town, but it gets airborne, and the government, realizing what they've done, they surround the town. They get lots of men with guns and in like white hazmat suits, and they hem everybody in. They try and push everybody. They try and get all the residents into like the local school and the local church. They try and get everybody together so they can do testing, and they absolutely want to make sure that nobody gets out of this perimeter. But the disease itself, so what it does is it doesn't turn people into murderous people necessarily. It just makes them go literally crazy, but in different ways. So for example, one character gets the disease and suddenly they become really giggly and they can't take anything serious that's going on. They can't take anything serious, so they'll just be like and you know, somebody could be dying right in front of them and they might carry on giggling, you know, so they've literally gone crazy. Then you get another character who, once he's got the disease, he suddenly takes it upon himself to try it on with his daughter. He tries to bed her. Now, he wouldn't do that if he didn't have the disease, but again, the disease has made him go crazy, but in a different way to how it would make other people go crazy. So you never know how a character's going to react when they get the disease in this film. There's another guy who just starts dousing his house in kerosene, and for no real reason. He's going to set it on fire because he's just gone crazy. Again, he's reacting in a different way because every individual in this film responds differently to getting the disease. Some people get the disease and only really change in very subtle ways. So the interesting thing about this film is the fact that you can't always tell who's got the disease and who hasn't, because if you think about it, if soldiers were to surround a town in real life and start waving guns around and shepherding people into buildings and stuff, and people would get all panicky, they would fight back to an extent, they would demand answers which wouldn't necessarily be forthcoming. It would be a really frightening, scary experience, and people would change. You know, they might become violent, they might show sides of themselves that they'd never shown before, you know, back when their lives were just peaceful. So when people start acting out in this film and fighting back against the soldiers, and, you know, our main characters can't tell whether that's just somebody responding to what's going on or whether it's because they've got the disease and they're going a little bit crazy. So it just gives an absolutely fascinating slant to this story that I didn't expect. I thought this film was just going to be like the remake. I thought it was just going to be sort of an early version of the Dead universe. It would just be a sort of, you know, a little zombie side project that was similar, not similar, you know. But what I actually got was something that, joking aside, as I was doing in the prologue, is actually a very different experience from your traditional zombie film. Romero insists that we spend a lot of the film listening to the bureaucratic discussions that would go on in a situation like this amongst the army's top brass. So we listen to a lot of conversations about whether the army should put this many people on the perimeter or that amount of soldiers. Should there be a plane flying overhead with a bomb ready to nuke the town just in case? Should we bring in scientist X from Denver or scientist Y from New York? Should we test this amount of citizens to see if they've got the disease, or that many citizens? Should we start burning bodies? All these considerations, we actually listen to them. We spend a lot of time in like this little general's office, and it did cross my mind at various points. Should we be wasting large amounts of the runtime focusing on this viewpoint, or should we just be with our main characters, Judy and David, and their little group? So there are a few of the citizens who manage to stay out of reach of the soldiers in this film and go on the run. They're hiding out in like a golf course or a house or in the woods maybe, and their ultimate aim is to try and break through the perimeter and escape from the town. It's an exciting little adventure we go on with these people, but they've got all sorts of dangers flying in their face. There are loads of soldiers in the white outfits with the gas masks all over the place, and there are lots of little mini battles between the soldiers and our main characters. And then there's the threat from within, because David starts to realize that some of the characters within his group are getting symptoms of having the disease, but is it actually the disease, or are they just acting scared and angry because of what's going on? It's like what I was talking about earlier. But we don't just get the viewpoints of David's group and of the army. We also get these random little scenes now and again taking place anywhere in the town, really, of skirmishes going on between citizens and the army. Scenes that just feature entirely made up of red shirts, but they're interesting to watch. It just means that the film is attempting to do a little bit of world building. So we get a random scene where an old woman who clearly has the disease stabs a soldier with a knitting needle. One of the few times in the movie, I think, where somebody with the disease becomes really violent. Most of the violence in this film is just, it's a natural byproduct of what would happen when the army takes over a town, really. You know, it's not necessarily because of the actual disease. That's the interesting thing. But we get another random scene where some of the locals take up arms and get into like a gun battle with the soldiers, and just off to the side there's this random woman with a broom just cleaning up after them, completely oblivious to the fact that bullets are flying around everywhere. She's clearly got the disease. But I like these little insert scenes that are not necessarily to do with our main characters. They're just sort of thrown in there just to make the world seem fuller. Stephen King used to do this in some of his novels. He would have a few novels that would center around one town, one community, and maybe there would be a vampire infestation or a spaceship that's discovered under the ground, like in Tommyknockers. He would focus on certain viewpoints, but then just randomly halfway through the story, he would go off and have a chapter focusing on just random people and the various interesting situations they're getting up to around the community. And that's what we get in this film, and it's definitely a plus point, because I think some of the more interesting content in this film is just some of the random stuff that happens. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if King himself had watched The Crazies back in the early 70s and took a little bit of inspiration from it. The most fun to be had in this is just watching a lot of people getting shot left, right, and centre, citizens, soldiers. When I think of Dawn of the Dead, I mostly think of people being eaten, or maybe zombies being shot in the head. But when I think of The Crazies in the future, I'm mostly just going to think of people getting shot all over, that there are lots of splattery gunshot deaths in this, people falling down left, right, and centre. And yet, I don't think we fully process the horrors going on in this film as a viewer, because of the way that the whole film is shot in a very kind of emotionally detached way. I mean, sure, we can see some of the inner turmoil going on with David, the main character, and what he's having to keep down just in order to keep surviving, keep moving forwards. But a lot of this film is shown in a very kind of regimented, disciplined way. It's like Romero got hold of this idea, this story, and thought, right, I'm just going to make sure that I show all these events in a very disciplined, organized manner. I'm not going to get too much into the emotion of the film. I'm just going to present everything and let people think of the things that goes on in the story themselves. For example, the opening scene in this is quite horrific, actually. Like a husband kills his wife and then burns their family home down in actually the most extreme reaction to the disease that you probably get in this, now that I think about it. It's a horrible start to the movie, and it should absolutely have you reaching for the tissues, and yet it doesn't, because of the way that it's shown. If compare it to, say, the opening of Scream, where Drew Barrymore dies, that is horrific in terms of the emotion it has on the viewer. Like when I watch that opening scene in Scream, I'm kind of like, I feel like my soul has moved, just the way that it's shot, the music, the parents' reaction. But at the end of the day, it's just one girl dying. When I'm watching like half a family being taken out by a house fire at the beginning of The Crazies, I'm not as emotional about it because it's almost presented in a kind of matter-of-fact documentary style. It's not found footage, but just the tone of the movie. You've got these constant militarized drum beats going on throughout, almost as if all the footage in this film has been gathered up by the army in the future and put into chronological order so it can be studied. You know, we are sort of kept at a slight distance, I feel, emotionally throughout this tale, which is fine. It's not a criticism. It's just the style that they've gone for with this, but it was certainly different to what I was expecting. Confession time. I actually randomly bought this film about 18 months ago with a view to reviewing it on the channel. But after I'd watched it, I just didn't feel like doing the review. I kind of didn't know what to make of the film, and I felt like I just had nothing to say about it. So I scrapped the idea of reviewing it. The reason why I've come back to it now this week is because I'm about to embark on a run through the Romero of the Dead series, and it suddenly occurred to me that I've got the Crazies on my shelf, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool to just go back to the Crazies before I then proceed with the of the Dead films? And I think this time around, after my second viewing, I felt much better, in a much better position to kind of evaluate this very strange experience of a film and maybe put some of my thoughts about it on YouTube, because I don't know, I was just completely uninspired after that first film. It's like maybe I just wasn't in the right frame of mind to watch it. If you are going to check this film out, I would say don't go into it with the vibe of you just want to turn your brain off at the door and watch loads of people dying. Go into it with your thinking cap on. Maybe make it a kind of Tuesday, Wednesday night sort of film, and be prepared to sort of intellectually consider some of the things going on in this, because there's a lot of fascinating aspects to the story here, some of which are glaringly obvious, some of which aren't necessarily pointed out. Like for example, the concept of, should these characters get through the perimeter? Because if they do, then they're going to spread the disease to the rest of the country, therefore. So should we be supporting these main characters, or should we not? Are the army guys the good guys, actually? There's a lot of curious things to ponder about this. It's a strangely filmed experience, but I do kind of like it. It's not a brilliant film, but it's definitely the only film for me that I like of Romero's, outside of his zombie stuff. I haven't checked out everything that he's done. Probably there are one or two other films in his catalogue I would enjoy if I got around to it, though. I watched Martin a couple of years ago. I didn't really like that one. And I watched Two Evil Eyes, that one that he did with Argento, that half and half sort of a thing, and I thought Romero's half of that wasn't very good at all. So generally, when it comes to Romero, I stick to the zombie stuff, but I make a little bit of an exception for this because I think it's actually pretty decent, and I definitely liked it more second time around. I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got for this. I bought a really good Arrow version for this, actually, back when I bought it. It cost me like £13, quite pricey, I guess, given that I'd not previously seen it. Lots of features on the box that I've absolutely not checked out. An audio commentary by Travis Crawford and various other interviews and things like that. There's some decent stuff on here, I guess. The picture looks amazing, but I don't think the sound is that great. I'm not sure they've even changed the sound from whatever this film, how this film would have been released in the past. For the first half of this film, the sound, the tinniness of the sound was bugging me a little bit, and I think at some point my brain got used to it around about the halfway point, and the second half of the film I wasn't even thinking about it by then. But definitely I noticed the sound maybe not that great in this. It's a little bit of at odds with just how amazing the picture looks, because the restoration is absolutely superb. Right, so let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this film. So we got 1, 2, 3, 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. I would absolutely say check this film out, and I will be back soon to do Night of the Living Dead as I embark on my Romero zombie series. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.